Hey guys, welcome back. Or maybe, welcome for the very first time. If you're here, you probably already know the drill. It's late. Maybe you've got the lights dimmed down super low. Maybe you've got a comfy pillow. Or maybe you're just staring blankly at the ceiling. The goal, as always, is to just let these words wash over you. There are no quizzes, no shocking revelations, and absolutely no intense drama. Just very long, very detailed, and hopefully very boring stories about people from the past who had way too much money and, eventually, had a really bad day. Tonight, we're doing a gentle, low-stakes dive into the world of royal defeat. We hear all about the kings who lost the battles, the emperors who were deposed, the men who sailed away to an island prison. But what about the women? What about the wives of fallen kings? Their entire job, historically speaking, was to be a dynastic vessel and a fancy symbol. When the dynasty, asterisk falls over asterisk, what do they do with the expensive symbol? It turns out their lives after the big dramatic defeat often involve decades of quiet, mildly tragic, and incredibly awkward exile. It is time to follow some of the world's most recently powerful women as they trade thrones for English suburbs. We are going to start with someone whose life went from the absolute pinnacle of European glamour to basically a fancy, very long period of mourning in a gigantic, chilly English house. I am, of course, talking about asterisk Empress Eugénie of France asterisk, the wife of Napoleon III. Empress Eugénie was born Maria Eugenia Ignacia Augustina di Palafox y Portocarrero di Guzman. Y Kirkpatrick, which is one of those names that sounds like her parents just kept adding titles until they ran out of breath. She was Spanish nobility, absolutely beautiful, and had a fascinatingly modern spirit for the mid-19th century. She met Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, who had finally managed to become the Emperor Napoleon III of France, thanks to the very famous last name he happened to have. He needed a wife who would produce an heir and look spectacular doing it. Now, Napoleon III was a bit of an odd duck. He was the nephew of the asterisk Napoleon, which is a bit like being the nephew of a rock star. You get all the attention, but you never quite live up to the original act. He was short, had weird little waxed mustaches, and wasn't really built for the kind of epic drama his uncle specialized in. But he successfully staged a coup and declared himself emperor, because sometimes history just repeats itself with slightly less exciting sequels. He proposed to Eugénie. She, famously, supposedly said she'd rather have the love of the emperor than the friendship of a king, which sounds like something you'd write on a high school diary page. But for them, it actually worked out. They married in 1853, and Eugénie became a fashion icon, a glamorous queen of French society, and a woman who definitely deserved a better tailor than most people in Europe at the time. The Second French Empire was glorious for a while. Paris got its famous wide boulevards. There were big parties. And Eugénie was basically the queen of everything. She was powerful. She was respected. She commissioned beautiful jewels. She had the life. And then, as is always the case in the stories we tell here, everything had to go horribly, irrevocably wrong. It was the year 1870, and the French under the command of her husband got into a rather unwise war with Prussia. This was less a geopolitical struggle and more like a spectacularly bad idea. They came together over a series of miscommunications. Napoleon III was captured at the disastrous Battle of Sedan, a battle that, let's be honest, he probably should have just skipped. The moment news reached Paris, the empire vanished in a puff of political smoke. The people of Paris, who were generally quite fond of the idea of an emperor, but not so much the practice of one, declared a republic. Of course they did. This is France. A republic is always waiting just around the corner, ready to pop out and shout surprise. Empress Eugénie was left alone in the magnificent Tuileries Palace in Paris, surrounded by servants who were suddenly wondering if they should polish the silverware or start barricading the doors. The entire imperial government evaporated faster than a glass of champagne at a royal ball. Her escape was hilariously undignified for someone who wore that many diamonds on a daily basis. Eugénie basically had to flee Paris in a panic. She didn't leave in a fancy carriage with a military escort. Oh no. She left in a cab. A very normal, slightly dusty Parisian cab, which is the historical equivalent of escaping a massive palace coup in an Uber. She was helped by her dentist, an American named Dr. Evans, because when you're an empress in mortal peril, you definitely want to trust the person who spends their time drilling your molars. Dr. Evans, being American, was presumably thrilled by the sheer dramatic spectacle of it all, and was happy to drive his former patient out of the city in his private carriage. Imagine the scene. This woman, who only hours ago was the most powerful female figure in Europe, had to stop at a toll booth and pay a small fee to leave her own capital city. The irony is just exquisite, isn't it? She was disguised, of course. She wore a veil and plain clothes, which, for a woman whose plain clothes probably cost more than the average house, was quite the sacrifice. They made it across the Channel to England, because where else does disgraced European royalty go? England, specifically Queen Victoria, was always ready to host an awkward refugee relative. Queen Victoria, who was basically the aunt who collects stray monarchs, welcomed Eugénie. Eugénie ended up settling in Camden Place, Chislehurst which sounds incredibly elegant, but is really just a large, drafty country house in Kent, a very nice suburb of London. She went from the glittering, highly centralized power of the Tuileries Palace, which was basically the center of the universe, to a place where the local excitement was probably whether the new post office would open on time. Her husband, the Emperor Napoleon III, was initially a prisoner of the Prussians, but he was eventually released and came to join her in Chislehurst. They lived there together for a couple of years, to monarchs reduced to being a rather dull, wealthy, and politically obsolete couple. They walked around the grounds. They waved to the very curious English neighbors. They definitely complained about the weather. It must have been so profoundly strange. One day, you decide the fate of nations. The next, you're trying to figure out which teacup goes with which saucer in the dining room of your English suburban mansion. The sheer quietness of it all. After the constant roar of imperial acclaim, the silence in Chislehurst must have been absolutely deafening. Napoleon III, bless his heart, didn't last long in the gentle English exile. He was sick, he was depressed, and he was an emperor without an empire, which is a very draining condition. He died in 1873 after an operation to remove bladder stones, which is a fantastically undignified end for a man named Napoleon. He didn't even die in a battle or a coup. He died because of some small, irritating rocks. So now, Eugénie was not just a deposed empress, but a widow. She had her only son, the Prince Imperial, who was supposed to eventually take back the throne of France. That was her great, persistent hope that the French people would realize their mistake and call for the Bonapartes to come back. Because that's how royal thinking works. Asterisk, of course, asterisk, they want us back. Who wouldn't want a Napoleon running things? But the French were quite happy with their republic. Thank you very much. They were busy doing very French things, like being dramatic and having political arguments. And they had absolutely no interest in bringing back a slightly tired dynasty, living in a large house in Kent. Then, more tragedy. The Prince Imperial, their only son, was a young, dashing man, desperate to prove himself. Since he couldn't join the French army because, well, they didn't want him, he went and volunteered for the British army. He was sent to South Africa to fight in the Anglo-Zulu War. A prince of France fighting for the British against the Zulus. It's a historical footnote so deeply absurd it almost sounds made up. And because fate is often snarky, the Prince Imperial was killed in a small, completely unnecessary skirmish in 1879. He was ambushed, and that was that. The entire future of the Bonaparte line, the great dynasty that had reshaped Europe, was snuffed out in a random foreign field far away from the gilded halls of Paris. This broke Eugénie. It wasn't just the personal grief, which was immense. It was the final, absolute political ending. There was no one left to restore the empire. The whole project was done. She was simply a rich, Spanish-born, former French empress living in a large English house with a lifetime supply of very sad memories. She relocated to a new, even grander house in the English countryside, asterisk, asterisk, Farnborough Hill, asterisk, asterisk. And she lived there for the next asterisk 40 years, asterisk. 40 years of being the former empress. Think about that quiet, long stretch of time. She didn't start a business. She didn't become a social reformer. She just lived, waiting for the polite English world to forget her, while she slowly forgot the glorious life she once had. She corresponded with people. She decorated her house. She watched the world move on. She became a symbol of a forgotten era. The Second Empire was now just material for history books and costume dramas. Eugénie herself lived long enough to see the start of the First World War. She was 94 when she finally passed away in 1920, almost 50 years after she had to pay that last toll on the way out of Paris. The Empress of the French, the queen of European glamour, ended her life as a very, very old, wealthy lady who liked quiet gardening in the English suburbs. The ironic contrast between the peak of her power and the longevity of her very dull exile is just perfect for our purposes, isn't it? A life that started as a fairy tale and ended as a very long, slightly slow afternoon tea. Let's float over now to another royal disaster, One that happened a bit earlier and was frankly a bit more messy, and involved a much less forgiving host country than England. We're heading back to the 1600s, to a woman who was supposed to be the queen of 3 separate kingdoms, and ended up as a slightly awkward refugee in the Netherlands. We are going to settle in with Henrietta Maria of France, the wife of the famously defeated Charles I of England. Henrietta Maria's story is a beautiful illustration of how royal women were essentially human chess pieces, and when the game gets knocked over, they're the ones that roll under the furniture. She was the daughter of the great King Henry IV of France, so she came from what was, at the time, the real glamorous royalty. She was Catholic, French, and spirited. Now, her husband, Charles I, the King of England, Scotland, and Ireland, was, well, he was a king who really believed he was king. The divine right of kings was his whole vibe. He was short, sensitive, and had a slight stammer. But he had this utterly unshakable belief that God had personally chosen him to rule. This made him not very good at compromising, which is a major drawback when your parliament absolutely hates your taxes and your religious policies. They married when she was 15, which was standard for the time. But this marriage was immediately a problem. Henrietta Maria was a Catholic queen in a Protestant country. The English people were immediately suspicious of her, fearing she was going to turn Charles I into a secret agent of the Pope. And honestly, she probably didn't help herself much. She brought a massive entourage of French, Catholic priests and servants. She had her own chapel. She was very, very French, and the English were very, very English, which rarely mixes well without copious amounts of alcohol, even now. She was also a massive spender. She loved clothes, jewelry, and parties. Charles I, who was constantly having money arguments with Parliament, found his new wife was spending the equivalent of a small country's GDP on dresses. The tension in England between the king and Parliament, between the Protestants and the Catholics, was simmering for decades. Henrietta Maria was often accused of influencing her husband toward absolute rule and Catholic leanings, and she probably was influencing him. She was fiery, she was smart, and she was fiercely loyal to her husband. But when the English Civil War finally broke out in 1642, the glamorous queen had to become an unlikely action hero. Her husband, Charles I, raised his banner, Parliament raised theirs, and the whole island descended into civil conflict. Henrietta Maria's role became essentially that of an arms dealer and fundraiser. She sailed over to the Netherlands, which was the main moneylender of the era, and started pawning the crown jewels of England to buy guns and supplies for her husband's army. Think about that for a second. The literal symbols of her power, the great historical diamonds and rings, were being handed over to Dutch bankers to pay for gunpowder. She was incredibly successful at it, too. She was gutsy. She sailed back to England in 1643 with a fleet of ships loaded with supplies and money. Dodging parliamentary ships and storms, she landed on the Yorkshire coast, grabbed some troops, and personally rode to join her husband. It's all very cinematic, but remember, the ultimate goal here is sleep. So we must narrate it like a very boring, slow tax report. The problem, of course, was that while she was personally brave, the royalist cause was failing. And that is where our story truly begins for her. The king's forces were defeated, Charles I was captured, and Henrietta Maria knew, quite rightly, that she and her children had to leave. She escaped to France in 1644, which was her home country. It was her brother, King Louis XIII, who was the king of France. So, she thought, great, I'll be fine. Family, she was wrong. She arrived in France, and a few years later, her brother died. Then, France itself erupted into its own messy civil war, known as the Fronde. So Henrietta Maria, the Queen of England in exile, was living in the Louvre Palace in Paris, and she couldn't even get a decent meal. Because her French relatives, who were busy fighting their own war, kept forgetting to send her any money. She was the guest no one really wanted. She was the queen of a defunct kingdom, and she was, famously, absolutely broke. She was writing frantic, desperate letters back to England and to her other royal relatives, basically saying, "Can someone please send me some cash? I'm the Queen of England, and I can't afford firewood." The great, fashionable spendthrift queen was freezing in the Louvre. Then came the final, brutal blow in 1649. Her husband, Charles I, was tried by the victorious Parliament and publicly executed. The King of England was dead, and Henrietta Maria became the widow of a regicide victim. She was now a queen mother in exile, completely dependent on the fluctuating kindness of her French family. The great paradox of her life was that she had escaped the English Civil War only to be impoverished and ignored in a French Civil War. She spent the next 10 years in Paris, in various degrees of cold and poverty. She was trying to raise her children, including the boy who would eventually become Charles II, while maintaining the dignity of a woman who was supposed to be a queen, but whose personal fortune wouldn't buy a decent horse. It's a tragic story, but one must admire her stubbornness. She kept calling herself Queen of England, which is a bit like calling yourself the CEO of a company that went bankrupt a decade ago. But you still keep the business cards. The absolute royal insistence on maintaining the title, even when you are literally rationing candles in the Louvre, is the kind of endearing, slightly bonkers delusion that makes history so compelling for our purposes. The narrative of her life had shifted from the political power play to the very mundane, daily struggle of making ends meet while still pretending you were royal. Her life was defined by the very quiet, tedious details of exile. How to keep up appearances, how to marry off her children, how to get the French court to stop treating her like that one weird aunt who always shows up uninvited and talks about her imaginary life as a monarch. Let's leave her there for now, slowly freezing in Paris, but knowing that she has a long, long road ahead of her. She'll get her moment of triumph sort of when her son is restored to the throne. But that's a story for another slow, sleepy night. For now, let the image of a queen trading her great-grandfather's gold for muskets and then begging for firewood be the thing that keeps the gentle current of history flowing. We are just beginning our long, slow journey into the quiet aftermaths of royal defeat. We have so many more fallen queens to visit. It's really quite incredible how many of them ended up in these enormous, silent, slightly dusty English or Dutch houses, just waiting for a letter that never came. Settle in, because we have a long, long way to go, and the pace will not pick up. It's just going to keep gliding along, perfectly monotone, until you're long gone. Let's float over to another royal disaster, one that happened a century or so later, and involved a woman who was absolutely not going to freeze quietly in a Parisian palace. We are talking about Maria Carolina of Austria Queen of Naples and Sicily. And her story is just a masterclass in repeated, frantic, and slightly theatrical escapes. Maria Carolina was a daughter of Empress Maria Theresa, which means she was one of those many Habsburg princesses used as dynastic glue to stick Europe together. She was married off to Ferdinand IV, King of Naples and Sicily. Now, King Ferdinand, what a guy! He was a Bourbon, which means he had a lot of money and a family history that was less about statecraft and more about elaborate, tragic eccentricity. Ferdinand, bless his heart, was notoriously simple. He liked hunting. He liked fishing. He did not like paperwork. He was functionally illiterate and apparently preferred to spend his time on the docks selling the fish he caught, rather than ruling his kingdom. His court was generally described as wildly unsophisticated. So you have this incredibly sharp, politically ambitious Habsburg princess who arrives to marry this simple man who just wants to hang out with fishermen. It's an ironic contrast made in historical heaven. They had 18 children, because, of course, they did. Maria Carolina quickly realized that if the kingdom was going to be run at all, she was going to have to do it. And she did. She became the power behind the throne. She was sharp, she was manipulative, and she had a deep, burning Habsburg hatred of the French Revolution. Why? Because the French Revolution executed her sister, Marie Antoinette. And when your sister gets publicly executed by a foreign power, you tend to hold a grudge. She basically turned Naples into an anti-French headquarters. She was involved in treaties. She appointed ministers, and she spent every waking hour worrying about those pesky revolutionary ideas spreading across Europe. She was a proper, iron-willed queen, running a proper kingdom, while her husband was probably wrestling a fish somewhere. And then Napoleon Bonaparte happened. Because Napoleon is the guy who ruins absolutely everything for everyone in this era. The French Revolutionary Army, full of asterisk ideas and bayonets started invading Italy in the 1790s. Maria Carolina had Naples join the various coalitions against France, which, looking back, was a fantastically brave but profoundly stupid idea. In 1798, the French arrived, and here we have the first of her great, awkward royal flights. The royal family, Maria Carolina, Ferdinand, and their whole entourage had to panic evacuate. They fled from Naples, which is on the mainland, to the island of Sicily. Now, Sicily is part of the kingdom, but it is not the main part. It's the part you go to when the main part is on fire. Their flight was engineered by the famous Admiral Horatio Nelson, the great British naval hero, who was, at the time, also having an extremely public and highly awkward affair with one of Maria Carolina's ladies-in-waiting, Emma Hamilton. The whole thing was less a dignified royal retreat and more chaotic. High seas drama involving a famous admiral, his mistress, and a terrified queen. They arrived in Palermo, Sicily, where they were safe, but deeply unhappy. Maria Carolina was essentially the queen of a rather small, dusty island. She had lost Naples, the real jewel. The French declared a new thing, the Parthenopan Republic, in Naples, which failed because, of course, it did. These early republics never stuck around for long. So, Maria Carolina fought back. She hired a band of truly brutal, non-uniformed thugs and had them storm the mainland. By 1799, she was back in Naples. They restored the Bourbon monarchy, and Maria Carolina was back in charge. The problem: she had a massive, post-traumatic political meltdown. She started a reign of terror, executing everyone she thought was even remotely a French sympathizer. She was angry. She was paranoid. She was very tired of running away. This was probably understandable, but it did not make her very popular. The French, naturally, came back. Napoleon, who was now emperor, decided that the Bourbon Kingdom of Naples was just an irritant he needed to scratch off the map. In 1806, the French invaded again. This time, there was no doubt. It was a proper, permanent invasion. So, Maria Carolina had to flee again. Second time's the charm, right? She and Ferdinand were back to Sicily, but this time, it was different. This time, the British were the only reason they were safe. The British Navy was protecting Sicily, basically turning it into a very expensive, sun-drenched, and politically complicated refuge. They had lost the mainland for good. This is where the political tragedy turns into a long, quiet awkwardness. Maria Carolina, the absolute monarch, found herself a prisoner of her protectors. She wanted to rule Sicily like she used to rule Naples, but the British, led by Lord Bentinck, who was a deeply condescending man, basically said, "No, we're paying for your protection, so you need to do what we say." The Queen was furious. She spent years in Sicily, trapped, arguing with British diplomats who spoke to her like she was a tiresome child. Imagine being the daughter of Maria Theresa, the woman who ruled a massive empire, being told by some British lord how to run your own little island refuge. She was constantly writing letters, throwing tantrums, and trying to plot a return to Naples using the Spanish or Russian fleets, or whoever would listen. She was running on pure, exhausted Habsburg spite. Lord Bentinck finally had enough of the constant histrionics and the ceaseless political maneuvering. He forced her out. Yes, the Queen of the host kingdom was exiled by her own protectors . The British forced her husband to sign a treaty stripping Maria Carolina of all political power and making her leave Sicily. She was given a gigantic pile of money, a lavish pension, and a one-way ticket to Vienna, which, on the surface, sounds lovely. Go home, see your family, relax. But the journey she took was utterly insane. She couldn't go by the standard, safe route through Italy, because that was controlled by the French. So she decided to travel east . She sailed from Sicily, around Greece, and landed in the Ottoman Empire, modern-day Turkey. She then proceeded to take a very very slow, overland trip asterisk all the way asterisk from the Balkans, through the Ottoman Empire, and finally back to Vienna. This was a 7,000-mile detour of pure aristocratic inconvenience. Think about the logistics. This was a massive entourage, traveling through territories where no one spoke German or Italian, all because she couldn't take the easy way home. It's the historical equivalent of taking a flight from London to Paris that goes via Tokyo. She was exhausted by the time she finally reached Vienna in 1814. But the final, petty tragedy awaited her there. She was hoping for a glorious welcome. She was the sister of an emperor, the widow of a king, the mother of many Habsburg and Bourbon children. But the Austrian quarter *own family saw her as a liability. She was too dramatic, she was too old, and she was too insistent on fighting Napoleon, while Austria was busy trying to make peace with him. Her own nephew, Emperor Francis II, effectively told her to sit down and be quiet. The woman who had essentially ruled a major kingdom for 20 years was now just a forgotten aunt. In a massive Habsburg palace, she died a few months later. Let's gently transition, then, into the 20th century, a time when losing a throne was no longer a matter of getting shipped off to an English country estate, but rather a matter of escaping the continent entirely before a firing squad showed up. We are now talking about Empress Zita of Bourbon-Parma ***. She was the wife of Karl I, the very last ruling emperor of Austria and king of Hungary. Zita came from the ancient house of Bourbon-Parma. She was one of a staggering 24 children that her father had across to marriages, which is just a truly absurd number of siblings to keep track of. She was a pious, intelligent, and fiercely traditional woman who, unfortunately, married a man at the absolute worst possible moment in world history. Her husband, Karl, was a nice enough guy. He was gentle, devoted, and a genuinely competent military man, which is a rarity in the late-period Habsburg family. The problem was his great-uncle, the ancient Emperor Franz Joseph, who had ruled the massive Austro-Hungarian Empire for basically forever. Karl was never supposed to be the emperor. He was way down the line of succession, until various Habsburgs kept making politically inconvenient or outright deadly decisions. But then, of course, Archduke Franz Ferdinand got assassinated in 1914. And that's the moment the whole gigantic, messy Habsburg dynasty got shuffled into a deck of cards that was about to be blown away by a very large global wind. Franz Joseph finally died in 1916. So, Karl and Zita inherited the throne right in the middle of World War I. Talk about awkward timing. You get to be Empress just as the whole place is collapsing. It's like being named captain of the Titanic after it's already hit the iceberg. Their reign was spectacularly short, only 2 years. Zita was active. She tried to help with the war effort, and she and Karl desperately tried to make peace. But the war machine was too big, and the empire was too tired. In November 1918, the whole Austro-Hungarian Empire just dissolved. It didn't lose a big, defining battle and then formally surrender. It fractured into a bunch of independent nation-states, all saying, "We're done with this Habsburg thing, thanks." Karl and Zita, living in the massive Schönbrunn Palace in Vienna, realized they had no authority left. The army was gone. The crowds were angry. They were still in the palace, but everyone was suddenly telling them they weren't emperor and empress anymore. It was incredibly weird. On November 11th, 1918, Karl issued a proclamation basically saying he would step back from ruling. He didn't formally abdicate because Zita, who was a traditionalist to the core, absolutely refused to let him. She told him, famously, "A sovereign can never abdicate, because why give up a title you've only had for 2 years, even if it's currently worthless?" The Republic of Austria was declared, and the ex-imperial family, with 8 children, was basically trapped in their own palace. The new government let them stay for a bit, out of a kind of deeply ingrained Austrian politeness. But things got very tense, very quickly. It became clear they needed to leave, before someone decided that the Habsburgs should suffer this same fate as the Romanovs over in Russia. And here's where the British pop up again, always ready to ferry deposed monarchs around Europe. The family was quietly bundled onto a train by a British officer, Colonel Strutt, and were evacuated to the neutral country of Switzerland. It was a very awkward train ride. The British officer was in full uniform. The ex-imperial children were probably grumpy and confused, and the train was just chugging slowly out of the enormous empire their father had just lost. They spent a couple of years in Switzerland. It was quiet. It was dull. It was Swiss. Karl, the former emperor, was bored out of his mind. He was still nominally emperor because Zita wouldn't let him abdicate, which means they were constantly plotting their return. They made separate attempts to return to Hungary in 1921, trying to reclaim the throne, because why not double down on a bad idea? Both attempts failed utterly and completely. The Hungarians were politely but firmly done with the Habsburgs. After the second failure, the Allied powers got annoyed. Enough is enough, they said. They decided that Karl was a dangerous political liability and had to be sent somewhere really far away and inconvenient. They chose the island of Madeira. Madeira is a beautiful island, but it is politically isolated and strategically useless, which made it the perfect royal prison. The emperor, empress, and their children were split up. The children stayed in Switzerland for safety, while Karl and Zita were taken aboard a British light cruiser, the HMS Cardiff *, and sailed off to the middle of the Atlantic. Imagine Zita going from ruling an empire that stretched across Central Europe to standing on the deck of a British warship heading to a volcanic island she'd probably never heard of. It's the ultimate downsizing. They arrived on Madeira in November 1921. They were placed in a villa that was much too small for them. They were short on money because the Habsburg fortune was, like all good fortunes in that era, tied up in various messy, freezing bank accounts that were suddenly in new countries. Karl, who was depressed, bored, and now trapped on an island, quickly fell ill. He died in April 1922, just 5 months after arriving on Madeira. He died of pneumonia in a villa that was cold and drafty. Because even the last Habsburg emperor deserves a slow, pathetic, historical exit. We're settling in now with Maria Pia of Savoy, Queen of Portugal, a name that sounds like the main character in a mildly melodramatic opera. She was another princess used as a dynastic bridge. She was the daughter of King Victor Emmanuel II of unified Italy, and she was married off to King Louis I of Portugal. This was in 1862. Maria Pia was 15. Louis was 24. She was beautiful, vivacious, and utterly devoted to being a proper queen. Her husband, Louis, was another one of those historical figures who was way too simple for the job. He was a sweet man, but his main passion was marine biology. Yes, the King of Portugal spent most of his time publishing scientific papers on oceanic crustaceans. So, Maria Pia arrived in Lisbon, ready to be a glamorous monarch, and found her husband was basically a very well-funded marine science enthusiast. She quickly became the one who handled the public-facing monarchy. She loved parties. She loved charities. She loved commissioning public works, which led the Portuguese press to call her the Angel of Charity, which is a very nice nickname until things go wrong, and then they call you something else entirely. She was also, predictably, a massive spender. She loved jewels and fancy clothing. Her personal extravagances, even if they were ultimately small potatoes compared to the national debt, started to annoy the Portuguese people. They had an eccentric king who was off looking at barnacles, and a foreign-born queen who was throwing lavish parties. Not a great look when the political mood is sour. The monarchy in Portugal was constantly threatened by political instability and economic woes. It was a proper, late-period Bourbon mess of endless political coups and changes in government. King Louis died in 1889 after a long, quiet life of observing marine life. Their son, Carlos I, inherited the throne, and he was a disaster. King Carlos was an arrogant, politically tone-deaf monarch who was widely perceived as corrupt and ineffective. He was the kind of ruler who seemed incapable of making a popular decision. He spent money wildly. He hired a prime minister who was basically an absolute dictator. The Portuguese people hated him. Maria Pia was now the Queen Mother. She stood by her son, of course, but the situation was becoming untenable. The whole country was simmering with Republican fervor. They didn't want a king who was a dictator. They wanted a republic. And then came the famous, shocking event of 1908. The Lisbon regicide King Carlos I, the Queen Mother Maria Pia, and the king's son, the heir apparent Luis Felipe, were riding through the streets of Lisbon in an open carriage. They had just arrived back from a holiday. It was a beautiful, sunny afternoon. They probably thought, look at us, being popular and driving in an open carriage. Suddenly, 3 Republican assassins opened fire. It was incredibly brutal. King Carlos was killed instantly. The heir, Luis Felipe, was also killed. He tried to shoot back at the assassins with his small revolver, but he was fatally wounded. The entire future of the monarchy was wiped out in a matter of seconds. The surviving person in the carriage was King Carlos's youngest son, Manuel. He was only 18. He became the new king Manuel to and the queen mother, Maria Pia, was left to deal with the utter, devastating, chaotic emotional fallout. She had just witnessed the murders of her son and her grandson. The trauma was immense. She reportedly never quite recovered, spending the rest of her life in a state of quiet, nervous shock. She had to sit by and watch her last remaining son, Manuel II, try to glue a shattered monarchy back together. Manuel II's reign was short, only 2 years. He was just a young man, inexperienced, and facing a country that was utterly done with the monarchy. In October 1910, the Republican Revolution finally broke out. It was a popular, widespread military uprising. The royal palace in Lisbon was shelled. The king and the queen mother, Maria Pia, realized they had no support left, so they fled. Manuel II, the very young, very last king of Portugal, along with his mother and his grandmother, Maria Pia, escaped from the palace and made their way to a waiting yacht in the harbor. They sailed to Gibraltar, where they boarded the HMS Newcastle because, again, if you are deposed royalty, a British warship is basically your taxi service. They sailed across the channel to England, and here we have the sad, final irony for Maria Pia, the queen who had thrown lavish parties and spent extravagantly to promote the dignity of the Portuguese crown, ended her life as a sad, quiet, exiled old woman. She settled in Stresa, Italy, which was her home country. She was living off a pension from the new Portuguese Republic. The absolute humiliation of having your political enemies pay for your groceries. She was perpetually nervous, suffering from that deep-seated trauma of the regicide she witnessed. She became a reclusive, mournful figure. Her story is a tragedy of effort. She tried to be the perfect queen. She raised a beautiful family, but the political currents of history were simply too powerful. She died in 1911, just 1 year after the final fall of the monarchy. The constant stress, the regicide, the final, terrifying escape was simply too much for the dignified, vivacious queen to bear. She lost her throne twice. Once when her husband died and her son took over, and then again when the entire system collapsed. And in the end, she became just another expensive, sad guest in a relative's house, finally allowed to rest back home in Italy. Let's pull ourselves out of that gentle melancholy and move to a much older, darker era, where the consequences of defeat were far more immediate and visceral. We are going to glide back to the medieval period, to the crown of Castile and look at a woman who ended up locked in a convent, watching her entire family collapse into madness and political ruin. We're going to talk about Isabella of Portugal the wife of King Juan II of Castile. Isabella of Portugal is a name that often gets lost in the historical shuffle. Everyone knows her daughter, the famous Isabella of Castile, the one who united Spain and funded Christopher Columbus. But the mother's life was a complete, messy disaster, a perfect slow-burn tragedy for a sleepy night. She was Portuguese royalty, married off to King Juan II of Castile, who was one of those gentle, artistic, slightly weak-willed kings who are easily manipulated by everyone around them. He was a proper medieval mess of a ruler. Juan II had been married before, but his wife died. He needed a new one. Isabella was his second wife. She was young, spirited, and ambitious, and she arrived in the court of Castile to find it being run completely by a man named Alvaro de Luna. Alvaro de Luna was Juan II's favorite, his chief minister, and effectively the man who actually ran the kingdom. He was incredibly powerful, charming, and utterly dominant. Juan II was, quite frankly, obsessed with him. Isabella, the new queen, was not pleased. Her entire role was to be the wife of the king, and here was this chief minister, basically treating the king like a pet and running the country as he pleased. She hated de Luna. She saw him as a political threat and a personal humiliation. She bore the king a daughter, the future Isabella I. But the political tension at court was unbearable. The queen and her allies spent years trying to convince the weak-willed king that his beloved friend and chief minister, Alvaro de Luna, was a traitor who was going to steal the crown. It was a slow, agonizing psychological war, and Queen Isabella was the main aggressor. She was relentless. She badgered the king, she threw tantrums, and she basically used every manipulative trick in the royal book to turn her husband against the man he loved like a brother. And she finally won. In 1453, King Juan II, worn down by his wife's constant, years-long psychological assault, finally gave in. He had his beloved friend, the man who had served him his entire life, Alvaro de Luna, arrested and executed. The execution was a massive political shock, but the real historical tragedy followed immediately. King Juan II was absolutely shattered. He immediately regretted having his best friend killed. He fell into a deep, consuming despair. He had murdered his confidant on his wife's urging, and the guilt was enormous. He died a year later, in 1454. The stress, the guilt, the political chaos, it was simply too much for the sensitive king. And here's where Isabella of Portugal's tragedy begins. She was finally Queen Mother. Her enemy was dead, and her son by the late king's first marriage was now the new king Enrique IV. She should have been happy, she should have been powerful, but the years of intense political maneuvering, the emotional trauma of manipulating her husband, and the stress of the court finally caught up with her. Queen Isabella, in her early 20s, suffered a *** complete nervous breakdown ***. She was declared insane. The king, her stepson Enrique IV, who probably resented her for causing his father's death, had her locked away. She was sent to a castle fortress, and then finally to a convent in the village of Aravolo ***. And there she remained, in quiet, secluded confinement, for the remaining 43 years of her life. 43 years of being the Queen Mother, but completely removed from power, completely isolated, locked away in an asylum. Her daughter, the great Isabella I, grew up, fought a civil war, married Ferdinand of Aragon, united Spain, and became one of the most powerful, famous monarchs in world history. But her mother, the woman who started the whole chain of events, never saw any of it. She was in a quiet, medieval convent, living in a permanent, locked-away state of mental collapse. The contrast is incredible. The daughter, the great Isabella the Catholic, was financing voyages across the ocean and fighting to impose religious unity. The mother, the original Queen Isabella, was simply pacing the halls of a convent, lost in her own internal world. She died in 1496, after more than 4 decades of quiet, complete erasure from the world stage. Her whole, ambitious life was a frantic rush that peaked with the execution of her enemy, followed by 40 years of profound, silent defeat in an isolated asylum. She is the ultimate example of a life ruined by the very ambition that was supposed to save it. It's a sad, slow, medieval story, full of whispers and heavy stone walls, a perfect counterpoint to the glamour of Empress Eugenie's gentle English retirement. We still have a long way to go in our exploration of quietly defeated queens. We look at a queen whose husband literally ran away to fight a war he couldn't win, and a queen who got stuck in a palace where everyone ignored her. So just settle back down, let your eyes get heavy, and let us slowly glide along this long, quiet road of royal failures and lengthy, inconvenient exiles. Let's pull ourselves gently forward in time again, back to the 18th century. We are heading to the short-lived, deeply unhappy, and geographically confusing life of Maria Amalia of Saxony who was the queen of 2 different kingdoms, both of which proved to be incredibly awkward to rule. Maria Amalia was another one of those European princesses who was, essentially, a political prize. She was married off to Charles III of Spain Before he was the King of Spain, he was the Duke of Parma, and then he was crowned King of Naples and Sicily. He was a Bourbon, of course, because at this point in history, if there was a throne in Europe, a Bourbon or a Habsburg was probably sitting on it, or desperately trying to get back on it. Maria Amalia was an intelligent and well-educated woman who loved the arts. She arrived in Naples to find a court that was, like many of the smaller Italian royal courts, a bit provincial and disorganized. She immediately got to work transforming the whole atmosphere. She introduced things like porcelain manufacturing and tried to bring a proper level of Habsburg Saxony sophistication to the Bourbon court. She was a tireless, successful queen. She and Charles had 13 children because, again, that was what royal couples did. They were happy, they were politically active, and they turned Naples into a vibrant cultural capital. All was well, and then Charles's older half-brother, Ferdinand VI of Spain, died in 1759. Ferdinand was one of those monarchs who didn't produce an heir, and was, frankly, a bit too moody for ruling a massive empire. So, Charles inherited the enormous Spanish crown. He was suddenly the king of the largest empire in the world, one that stretched across the ocean. This sounds like a huge promotion, right? King of Naples becoming King of Spain. But here is the historical detail that always makes me chuckle. Charles could not just merge the 2 kingdoms International treaties absolutely forbade it. Charles had to be King of Spain, But he had to hand over Naples and Sicily to his son Ferdinand IV, who, you might remember from Part 2, was the fishing king who caused so much trouble for Maria. Carolina, Ferdinand was only 8 years old, so the country had to be run by a regency council. This meant Maria Amalia and Charles had to pack up everything, all their children, all their sophisticated Neapolitan furniture, all their newly manufactured porcelain, and move to Madrid. They were leaving a happy, well-run, warm court for a colder, more traditional, and infinitely more challenging capital. Maria Amalia was Queen of Spain for only 7 months. The court in Madrid was far more rigid and formal than she was used to. It was deeply conservative and suspicious of foreign influence. She was trying to reform the etiquette and inject some Neapolitan style into the Spanish court, and the whole establishment simply hated her for it. She was trying to run a fancy, modern show at a stuffy, old theater, and the audience was not amused. The stress of the move, the change in climate, the exhaustion from constantly packing and unpacking 13 children, and the sheer hostility of the Spanish court was apparently too much. She became ill almost immediately. She died in September 1760, just a few months after arriving. She was only 36. Her death is the perfect picture of quiet, administrative defeat. She wasn't overthrown by a mob. She wasn't murdered in a carriage. She was simply defeated by paperwork, humidity, and the sheer dull resistance of the Spanish aristocracy. She was Queen of Naples and Sicily for 23 years of triumph, and Queen of Spain for just 7 months of miserable, unsuccessful adaptation. Her husband, Charles III, was so heartbroken that he never remarried. He supposedly told people, for the first time, "I have a Spanish wife," which is a backhanded compliment of the highest royal order, suggesting she finally looked proper and pale enough to be Spanish. It's the ultimate irony of royal life. You win the biggest prize in Europe, the Spanish Empire, and the prize kills you with paperwork and a chilly palace. Maria Amalia was queen consort of nowhere for 23 years, before she finally became queen consort of somewhere important, only to be immediately defeated by a common cold and a grumpy duke. A very sad, slow demise. Let's glide across the English Channel once more, back to the messy 17th century stew of royal exile. We need to revisit Mary of Modena the second wife of James II of England. This is a story of a queen who was overthrown not by foreign armies, but by a truly impressive level of British paranoia. Mary of Modena was another Italian princess from the Duchy of Modena. She was beautiful, elegant, and devoutly Catholic. She was married off to James, Duke of York, who was the younger brother of the reigning Charles II of England. James, who was short, bald, and deeply uncharismatic, was also openly Catholic. This was a massive problem in a country that had firmly committed to being Protestant. The English people were absolutely terrified of the Pope controlling England again. They were living in a constant state of low-grade panic about a Catholic takeover. Mary was immediately viewed with intense suspicion. She was Italian, she was Catholic, and her whole job was to produce her. Catholic heir to the English throne. The Protestant Parliament spent years trying to pass bills to exclude James from the succession entirely, because they would rather have anyone but a Catholic king. But James did become king in 1685. His reign was short, only 3 years. He was politically tone-deaf, constantly trying to force Catholic rights on a deeply resistant nation. He was basically leaning into the one thing the English public was begging him not to do. Mary's entire purpose, however, was still unfulfilled. She needed to give him a son. She had had several children, but they had all died in infancy, which was the heartbreakingly normal tragedy of the 17th century. Then, in 1688, she announced she was pregnant, and this is when the English paranoia went into overdrive. If Mary gave birth to a son, that son would be Catholic and would supersede James's Protestant daughter, Mary from his first marriage, in the line of succession. This was the ultimate nightmare for the Protestant establishment. The public reaction was insane. People started openly speculating that the pregnancy was fake. They claimed Mary was wearing pillows under her dress. They were obsessed. They basically decided that no Catholic heir could possibly be real. It was a massive, collective historical emotional meltdown. Mary gave birth to a healthy baby boy in June 1688, James Francis Edward, and the public immediately erupted with the famous, completely unfounded rumor that the baby was a changeling or, more specifically, that he had been smuggled into the birthing chamber in a warming pan Yes, a warming pan, the common object you use to heat your bed on a cold night. The story went that Mary had given birth to a stillborn child, and to ensure the Catholic succession, a healthy peasant baby was snuck into the Queen's room inside this metallic bed warmer. Because why bother with logical consistency when you have a good conspiracy theory? James tried to prove the baby was real by inviting lots of important Protestant figures to witness the birth, but even that didn't help. The damage was done. They believed the baby was a fraud. 3 months later, the whole kingdom imploded. The Protestant establishment invited the Dutch Prince William of Orange, who was James's nephew, and son-in-law to invade England and take the throne. This was the glorious revolution of 1688. It was glorious because almost no one fought. The English army basically looked at James II and said, "We're really tired and you're Catholic, so we're just going to let the Dutchmen have it." James II, seeing his support vanish faster than a tax cut, knew he was finished. He needed to get his wife and his very controversial baby son out of the country. Mary's escape was pure, chaotic slapstick. In the middle of the night, in a huge, dramatic rainstorm, she fled Surmai's palace in London. She was carrying the 3-month-old Prince of Wales, wrapped in blankets. She took a tiny boat across the Thames River, where she was nearly shipwrecked by the high winds. She was constantly terrified of being captured and separated from her baby. She finally made it to the coast of Kent and boarded a ship for France. Her husband, James II, tried to follow a few days later, but was captured by some local fishermen, who presumably just wanted to see what he had in his pockets. He was briefly held, and then, because William of Orange didn't want a martyr, James was essentially allowed to escape and join Mary in France. So, Mary of Modena, the Queen of England, ended her reign by almost drowning her son in the Thames and becoming the ultimate refugee queen. In the court of her cousin, the extremely Catholic and very powerful Louis XIV of France. Louis XIV, bless his soul, was incredibly generous. He installed James, Mary, and the warming pan baby in the beautiful Chateau de Saint-Germain-en-Laye just outside Paris. And there she lived, quietly, stubbornly, for the next 26 years. She was the Queen of England in exile, maintaining a proper little English court in a huge French chateau. They were completely dependent on the generosity of the French king, which is never a great feeling for a proud monarch. James II died in 1701. He was depressed, boring, and utterly convinced the entire Protestant world was a conspiracy against him, which, to be fair, was mostly true. Mary of Modena became the Queen Mother in exile. She devoted the rest of her life to her son, the old pretender, who was now claiming the throne of England. She was his chief political lobbyist, writing letters, appealing to the Pope, and keeping the Jacobite flame burning. It is the story of a queen whose entire power was destroyed by a ridiculous rumor about a bed warmer. She was undone not by military might, but by a hysterical, collective public delusion. And she spent the rest of her life in the gentle, humiliating quiet of French charity, never once setting foot in the kingdom she was supposed to rule. She died in 1718. It's just another quiet, long, slow-motion royal catastrophe, perfectly suited for a deep, gentle slide into history. The kind of life that starts with a grand wedding and ends with a polite French pension. We have time for one more brief, melancholy trip. We're going to glide back to the 19th century and visit the wife of one of history's great military failures. We're going to talk about Queen Emilie of Greece, the wife of Otto of Bavaria. This is a story of a queen who was so politically annoying that her country finally just asked her to leave. Let's drift quietly into the 19th century and visit the first queen of modern Greece. Emilie of Oldenburg, This is the perfect story of a well-meaning queen whose biggest mistake was simply not understanding the the entire country she was supposed to be ruling. Emilie was a German princess from the House of Oldenburg, married off to Otto of Bavaria, who was selected by the major European powers in 1832 to be the first king of the newly independent Kingdom of Greece. Otto was just 17 when he arrived in Greece. He was Bavarian, he spoke German, he was Lutheran, and he was supposed to rule a fiercely independent, Orthodox Christian, Greek-speaking nation that had just fought a bloody war to get rid of foreign rule. It was an awkward fit, to say the least. Emilie arrived a few years later, at the age of 20. She was beautiful, energetic, and had a very specific, very Prussian-German idea of how a proper court should be run. The two of them immediately made a series of baffling decisions. First, They decided that the Greek court should be run entirely by *BAVARIANS*. They imported an enormous entourage of German advisors, German military officers, and German household staff. The highest positions in the new Greek government went to people who spoke only German. It was basically a German colony with a Greek name. This, unsurprisingly, made the actual Greeks a little annoyed. Second, Queen Amelia herself was a huge influence. She refused to convert from Lutheranism to the Greek Orthodox Church, which was a massive public relations failure in a deeply religious country. She also insisted on wearing these famously elaborate, very heavy German court dresses, which looked profoundly absurd in the hot Athenian climate. The local women wore lighter, simpler clothing. Amelie looked like she was constantly overdressed for a formal ball in Berlin. She was also politically very active, far more so than her husband. She was strong-willed, opinionated, and constantly pushing her husband to rule as an absolute monarch, the way a proper German king should. The result was an inevitable, low-grade political fever. The Greeks tolerated Otto for a while, but they hated the German influence. The people and the military finally had enough. In 1843, there was a massive military uprising, demanding a constitution and the removal of the Bavarian advisors. The coup was led by the national military, not some political fringe group. The palace was surrounded, and the royal couple had no choice. King Otto was forced to sign a document granting a constitution. This moment is now commemorated as the **3rd of September Revolution**, and the square in front of the Greek parliament is still called Syntagma Square, which means Constitution Square. The king and queen survived, but their power was severely curtailed. They were still royalty, but now they had to be *polite royalty, which was not their specialty. Queen Amelie, however, was stubborn. She became even more reactionary after the coup. She refused to accept the constitutional limits and spent the next decade plotting, arguing, and trying to regain the absolute power she felt they deserved. She was a constant irritant to the Greek political class. She was nicknamed the Beautiful Fury for her political maneuvering. The Greeks, unfortunately, did not want a beautiful fury. They wanted a Greek-speaking, Orthodox king who lived within his means. By 1862, the situation was so toxic that another military coup was launched. But this time, the king and queen weren't even in the country. In one of the most undignified historical details of all time, King Otto and Queen Amelie were on a pleasant, relaxing royal tour of the Peloponnese when the revolution happened in Athens. They were taking a nice little boat trip, checking out the historical sites. When the Greek army seized the capital and declared the dynasty deposed, the news reached them on their boat. When they finally sailed back to Athens, the city was firmly in the hands of the new provisional government, and they were told, very politely, that they were no longer needed. The door had been firmly locked behind them while they were out for a drive. Imagine the conversation. Darling, what a lovely day for a sail. Wait, why are there no flags? Oh, right. We've been fired. They were given no choice. They boarded a British warship, the *HMS Scylla*, because, of course, a British warship, and sailed away from Greece for good. They returned to Bavaria where Otto was simply a prince of his family, with no claim on any crown. Amelie spent the final years of her life in the quiet, chilly surroundings of German court life. She died in 1875. Her entire 25 years of rule in Greece were characterized by her constant, stubborn attempt to be a proper German monarch in a country that desperately did not want one. She lost her throne not in a climatic battle, but because the country finally decided to change the locks while she was on holiday. Her defeat was quiet, polite, and profoundly humiliating. The ultimate historical equivalent of being ghosted by an entire nation. And with that final gently melancholic image of the beautiful Fury, sailing away from the shores of a country she never quite understood, we have reached the end of our very long, very slow, and very boring dive into the fates of the wives of fallen kings. Hopefully, your head is now heavy, your eyes are closing, and the gentle, monotonous rhythm of royal disasters has done its work. The ultimate irony of power is how quickly it can vanish, leaving behind only the very long, very awkward story of those left behind. Good night.
Today we will talk about a very old history topic. This story is from a time when there were no house, no cities, no schools and no books. This is the story of fire. Fire is not just a thing but that burns. Fire changed everything. Fire made human different from animals. Without fire, there would be no food like today, no protection, no progress, and maybe no modern world. This is the story of how fire slowly changed human life step by step. Long, long ago, humans were very weak. They had no clothes, no proper homes, and no weapons. They lived in forest and open land. They were always afraid. Big animals hunted them, cold weather, hot there, dark nights scared them. Human ate raw food. Raw meat was hard to chew. Raw plants were bitter and dangerous. People got sick easily. Many people died young. Life was very hard. The first time humans saw fire. Yes, fire was not first made by human. Fire came from nature. Lighting heat trees, volcanoes burned land, dry forest caught fire. Early humans saw fire from far away. They saw bright light. They felt heat. At first, they were scared. Fire was dangerous. Fire burned skin. Fire destroyed trees. But humans are curious. They watched fire carefully. Slowly, humans understood something important. Fire is dangerous, but fire is also useful. Fire give heat, fire give light. People start keeping fire interested of running away. They carried burning wood from natural fire. They portrayed that fire carefully. If fire dead, life became hard again. Fire became like a friend. Fire and warmth. Cold weather was deadly before fire. Winter killed many people. People shivered at night. Fire changed this. Fire kept human warms and people could live in a colder place. They could travel to new lands. Fire helped humans survive winter. This was a very big change in history. Fire and light. Before fire, night was very dark. Darkness brought fear. Wild animal hunted at night. Fire brought light. People could see at night. They could stay together. They could talk and think. This helped humans before social. This helped humans share idea. Fire created community. Fire and protection. Fire scared wild animal. Animal we are afraid of flame. They stayed away from fire. Humans used fire as protection. They slept near fire. This saved many lives. Fire became a side. Fire and cooked food. This was one of the biggest change in human history. Yes, human learned to cook food. Cooked meat was soft. Cooked plant were safe. People became stronger. Their brains grew bigger. Good food gave more energy. Scientists believe. Cooking helped human become intelligent. Fire helped create the human brain. Fire and tools. Fire helped humans make tools. They hardened wood in fire. They shaped stone using heat. Later, fire helped me melt metal. This lead to copper tools. They bronze tools. They iron tools. Fire started technology. Fire and caves. Human lived in caves. Caves were dark and cold. Fire made caves livable. Fire kept animal away. Fire gave light inside cave. Human painted on cave walls using firelight. This was early art. This was early culture. Fire and social life. Fire brought people together. People sat around fire, they talked, they shared stories. This was the beginning of language, this was the beginning of tradition. Fire created human society, learned to make fire. At first, human protected natural fire. Later, they learned to make fire. They rubbed stones, they rubbed wood. This was a huge discovery. Now fire was always available. Human we are no longer dependent on nature. This was the freedom. Fire and migration. Fire allowed humans to move. They went to good lands. They crossed mountains. Fire helped humans spread across the world, from Africa to Asia, from Asia to Europe, from Europe to everywhere. Fire helped humans conquering that plant. Fire and religion. Religion. Fire became scared. People believe fire was a magic. People worshipped fire. Yes, many religions used fire. Fire rituals started. Fire became a symbol of life. Fire and farming. Fire helped clear forest. People burned land. This made farming possible. Yes, farming changed human life. People settled down. Villages formed and cities were born. Are you know? Fast start civilization. Fire and industry. Thousands of years later, fire powered machine, fire boiled water, steam and gas were born. Factors started, trains moved, fire became energy. Fire and modern world. Today, fire still help us. Electric comes from fire. Cooking users use fire. Industries uses fire, and fire still saves human life. Conclusion: fire is not just that the fire is the history. Fire made humans human. Without fire, there would be no civilization, no cities, no technology. Fast is the greatest discovery in a human history. This, thank you. Today, now this is a very interesting story. I am feeling very relaxed now, because I am try to very best now to please subscribe, like, and comment. Thank you. Today we will talk about a very old history topic. This story is from a time when there were no house, no cities, no schools, and no books. This is the story of Fire. Fire is not just a thing, but that burns. Fire changed everything. Fire made human different from animals. Without fire, there would be no food like today, no protection, no progress, and maybe no modern world. This is the story of how fire slowly changed human life step by step. Long, long ago, humans were very weak. They had no clothes, no proper homes, and no weapons. They lived in forest and open land. They were always afraid. Big animals hunted them, cold weather, hot there, dark nights scared them. Human ate raw food. Raw meat was hard to chew. Raw plants were bitter and dangerous. People got sick easily. Many people died young. Life was very hard. The first time humans saw fire. Yes, fire was not first made by human. Fire came from nature. Lighting heat trees, volcanoes burned land, dry forest caught fire. Early humans saw fire from far away. They saw bright light. They felt heat. At first, they were scared. Fire was dangerous. Fire burned skin. Fire destroyed trees. But humans are curious. They watched fire carefully. Slowly, humans understood something important. Fire is dangerous, but fire is also useful. Fire give heat, fire give light. People start keeping fire interested of running away. They carried burning wood from natural fire. They portrayed that fire carefully. If fire dead, life became hard again. Fire became like a friend. Fire and warmth. Cold weather was deadly before fire. Winter killed many people. People slept at night. Fire changed this. Fire kept human warm and people could live in a colder place. They could travel to new lands. Fire helped humans survive winter. This was a very big change in history. Fire and light. Before fire, night was very dark. Darkness brought fear. Wild animal hunted at night. Fire brought light. People could see at night. They could stay together. They could talk and think. This helped humans before social. This helped humans share idea. Fire created community. Fire and protection. Fire scared wild animal. Animal were afraid of flame. They stayed away from fire. Humans used fire as protection. They slept near fire. This saved many lives. Fire became a side. Fire and cooked food. This was one of the biggest change in human history. Yes, human learned to cook food. Cooked meat was soft. Cooked plant were safe. People became stronger. Their brains grew bigger. Good food gave more energy. Scientists believe cooking helped human become intelligent. Fire helped create the human brain. Fire and tools. Fire helped humans make tools. They hardened wood in fire. They shaped stone using heat. Later, fire helped me melt metal. This lead to copper tools. They bronze tools. They iron tools. Fire started technology. Fire and caves. Human lived in caves. Caves were dark and cold. Fire made caves livable. Fire kept animal away. Fire gave light inside cave. Human painted on cave walls using firelight. This was early art. This was early culture. Fire and social life. Fire brought people together. People sat around fire, they talked, they shared stories. This was the beginning of language, this was the beginning of tradition. Fire created human society, learned to make fire. At first, human protected natural fire. Later, they learned to make fire. They rubbed stones, they rubbed wood. This was a huge discovery. Now fire was always available. Human were no longer dependent on nature. This was the freedom. Fire and migration. Fire allowed humans to move. They went to good lands. They crossed mountains. Fire helped humans spread across the world, from Africa to Asia, from Asia to Europe, from Europe to everywhere. Fire helped humans conquering that plant. Fire and religion. Religion. Fire became scared. People believe fire was a magic. People worshipped fire. Yes, many religions used fire. Fire rituals started. Fire became a symbol of life. Fire and farming. Fire helped clear forest. People burned land. This made farming possible. Yes, farming changed human life. People settled down. Villages formed and cities were born. Are you know? Fast start civilization. Fire and industry. Thousands of years later, fire powered machine, fire boiled water, steam and gas were born. Factors started, trains moved, fire became energy. Fire and modern world. Today, fire still help us. Electric comes from fire. Cooking users use fire. Industries uses fire, and fire still saves human life. Conclusion: fire is not just that the fire is the history. Fire made humans human. Without fire, there would be no civilization, no cities, no technology. Fast is the greatest discovery in human history. This, thank you today. Now this is a very interesting story. I am feeling very relaxed now, because I am try to very best now to please subscribe, like, and comment. Thank you.